Blog Talk Radio.
You are now listening to True Murder, the most shocking killers in true crime history, and the authors that have written about them. Gacy, Bundy, Dahmer, The Night Stalker, BTK. Every week, another fascinating author talking about the most shocking and infamous killers in true crime history. True Murder, with your host, journalist and author, Dan Zupansky. Good evening. This is your host, Dan Zupansky, for the program True Murder, the most shocking killers in true crime history, and the authors that have written about them. On the morning of April 8, 2006, residents of the hamlet of Shedden, Ontario, woke up to the news that the bloodied bodies of 8 bikers from the Bandidos motorcycle gang had been found dead on a local farm. The massacre made headlines around the world, and the shocking news brought a grim light to an otherwise quiet corner of the province. 6 Bandidos bikers would eventually be convicted of the first-degree murder of their biker brothers. Like other outlaw bikers, Bandidos portray themselves as motorcycle enthusiasts who are systematically misunderstood and abused by the police, as well as feared by the public. We now know the Bandidos were anything but simple motorcycle enthusiasts. However, unlike such biker gangs as the Hells Angels, who run sophisticated operations, the Bandidos were highly disorganized, prone to petty infighting, and even engaged in sabotaging fellow members. This is the story of how the Bandidos self-destructed over one very dark night. As gripping as any crime novel, the Bandido Massacre takes us inside a crumbling brotherhood bent on betrayal and self-obliteration. The book that we were featured this evening is The Bandido Massacre, with my special guest journalist and author, Peter Edwards. Thank you for agreeing to this interview, and welcome to True Murder, Peter Edwards.
Oh, it's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Thank you very much, Peter. This is a very, very incredible story, and I think our audience, primarily we have a lot of people in America and abroad. So what I'll get you to do a little bit is maybe explain this, because we see, for those reading the book, you'll hear Shedden, Ontario, you'll hear Iona Station, and but for most people, we know the Greater Toronto area, no matter where they are in the world. So tell us where the proximity, where this all occurs. We're talking about London, Ontario. We're talking about Shedden. We're talking about Keswick, but we're talking about Toronto. Take us at least to the geography of where some of these things occur before we get too far into the story.
Where the killing took place was about midway between Toronto and Detroit, right on the, or just off Highway 401, so that's Canada's busiest highway. The Toronto chapter of the Bandidos was the one involved in the massacre, and one of their members lived in a tiny place called Iona Station, which only had 100 people, and that's about midway Toronto and Detroit.
Right.
It took place actually he had a farm there, like a sort of a farm that was off the highway, but secluded enough that things could be done there that other people couldn't see.
Right. Now, what we're talking about that this mass murder occurred on April 8th, 2006, but for our audience, take us back. You really do a exhaustive examination of biker culture in Canada. For those that don't know, really the hierarchy, tell us a little bit about the background of the Hells Angels and the Bandidos, where they sort of originate from, and tell us just a little bit about the history of the Canadian chapter, the Canadian chapters of those bike gangs, especially the Bandidos, that is very important to this story.
The Hells Angels had been locked into a street war with a group called the Rock Machine in Montreal, and that had gone on for about 6 years, and there had been almost 200 people killed in that. So it was genuinely a war, people being shot, blown up, disappearing. The Hells Angels were winning. The Rock Machine was basically a group of drug dealers that kind of joined together to form a gang to try and hold off the Hells Angels. When they saw they were losing, they reached out to the Bandidos, who are well-respected, really internationally known biker club based in mostly in Texas. That's where they got their start. They reached out to Texas for support, and what they did was folded into the Bandidos, and they hoped that that would hold off the Hells Angels. The Hells Angels kept pounding on them, and by around the time of the massacre, the Bandidos had been driven out of Quebec, and the Ontario ones, the Ontario Bandidos, were basically rose to the top because everybody else was either dead or in prison. And so really, it was the group that, on paper, they looked good, but they weren't really tested and they weren't really that strong.
Now, to set up this story as well, that for the people that don't know, that the Bandidos are the number 2 outlaw biker gang in the world, and of course the Hells Angels are the number 1. Is that correct?
Yeah, definitely. And the outlaws are always there. Like the outlaws have never been the top, but they've never been gone. So they're they're kind of the survivor group. The Hells Angels are a lot of people think that that's what everybody aspires to be, and then the Bandidos were started up from Vietnam War veterans. They got going in the 60s. The Hells Angels' roots go back to Second World War and veterans coming back from that.
Right. Now, what was the status of the Bandidos in 2006 and say even 2005? In that, not that many years ago, what was their status in terms of full member chapters in Canada, and where were the only chapters in Canada? Tell us about that, and tell us what the status was of this chapter in Winnipeg.
They had literally been kicked out of Quebec. Like the Hells Angels agreed to stop pounding on them if they would fold in Quebec, and so it was interesting because the deal was applied to prison as well as on the streets, and so by them being driven out of Quebec, all of a sudden Ontario became important. But Ontario altogether had maybe 36 members, not that many. Manitoba was trying to get going. There's a lot of violence in Manitoba, but it's not that organized. The Bandidos there saw an opening to pull things together and tighten it up a bit.
Okay.
At the same time, the Bandidos in Manitoba weren't really recognized, and they were looking to Ontario for guidance, and Ontario just didn't have the smarts to give it to them.
Now, there's a little more background to this as well that we find out later, but we might as well say that they're established that there was conflict between the Winnipeg, you call it a probationary chapter, and then the Toronto chapter is full members, if I'm not getting this incorrect. Now, there was something about dues owed. Again, we've already set up this a little bit in the synopsis that this is about petty infighting. So tell us what the relationship was between the Winnipeg probationary chapter and Toronto and some of the things that they may have had at issue before we get to a couple conversations and when the ball starts rolling in this very, very deadly direction.
Winnipeg, the Manitoba chapter, they were supposed to be deferential to Toronto. They were supposed to send them dues for each member who got in. They were supposed to be kicking in money-wise, and they just weren't really, and they weren't even being honest. At the same time, they were trying to do an end run around Toronto and go directly to Texas. They were trying to go from being a probationary chapter to being the top chapter in the country, and they had big kind of Napoleonic ideas of expanding, right. And they just thought they'd leave Toronto behind.
Right. Now, the Texas chapter, what was their interest in Canada, and what did they have to say about the situation between Winnipeg and Toronto? What was their take on the situation?
The Texans were frustrated with all of them, really. I mean, after 9/11, it became a lot tougher to cross the border. It became difficult to come up to somewhere where there was expansion and actually see what was going on, meet the members. People with criminal records who had a lot of trouble crossing the border either way. That meant that it was mostly internet contact, and people could just play stupid and not return emails. It's sort of bizarre, but the internet played a big role in this. And Texas was bright guys. A lot of them had jobs in the oil industry. A lot of them were part of something that had grown out of real military bases. So these are people who knew how to take orders, who knew discipline, who knew how to actually do things, and generally came to see the Canadians as drug-using idiots, for lack of a better word.
Yeah, right. Now, tell us about the, first off, I guess, you can tell us about the crew, the No Surrender crew, and tell us, just introduce the characters, because that's what this is all about, is these characters as opposed to another group of characters. So tell us about the No Surrender crew, who was involved, and one by one, give us a little bit of background on these people, these men.
The one that is kind of worthy of the most attention, although probably is worthy of the least respect at the same time, is Wayne Stein. He was in his late 50s a long-time outlaw biker, but none of the big clubs wanted him. The outlaws had taken a look at him; they didn't want to be near him. The Hells Angels had tried to kill him. There's a feeling among some Hells Angels that some people are too crazy to be dealt with, and that that you just get rid of them. And so he was in that category. He wore a lightning bolt on his vest, which was his way of saying that he had killed and gotten away with it. The feeling was that he had, killed someone who had killed a police officer, and that had given him a pass. That he was kind of he had an inside track to some of the police through murder. That they were giving him a bit of a wide berth. He's someone very, very unstable, drug user, Nazi lover, did really bizarre things that even in the biker world were considered too strange. Saw himself as very, very heroic. So he and a huge gun collector, tons of weapons, and he didn't take care of his guns, but he had weapons all over the place, hidden all through his house. He had them hidden behind cabinets, in the eaves troughs, just sort of everywhere. Dangerous guy. There's another one, Jamie Flans. He was not a full member. He was an odd fit for the bikers because he was Jewish, and to be Jewish and trying to get into a chapter with a Nazi lover is pretty strange.
Yeah.
But I think he was just playing it. I think it was more of a fashion thing for him. There's another guy, George Jessam. He a tow truck driver, very popular. He was dying of cancer and didn't want to be alone. He wasn't nothing criminal about the guy. Another guy, George Karakis. He was a nice Greek immigrant kid who was more of a rugby player than a biker, and he honestly thought that by being clean, he could clean up the entire club. He was briefly Canadian president, and there was a rebellion, but the Texans liked him because he actually was solid. There's a guy, John Boxer Mushedre. Boxer's just his nickname. He was a factory worker, a very solid guy, had been a good boxer, not a great boxer, but a good boxer. A ton of heart, not a thinker, but a real heart type of person. And he was very vulnerable because if he thought that someone was his brother, he'd do anything for them. And so Stein could manipulate him. There's one guy, Louis Raposo. He was a very, very tough guy. He was a survivor of the Quebec Biker Wars and had done jail time, was bitter because nobody visited him when he was in jail. Another guy, Frank Salerno, was looked imposing, but was a very, very needy guy. He had a drug addiction, a gambling addiction. He used to actually phone the Toronto Sun newspaper and asked for sports scores late at night, in the sort of the pre-internet time, because he wanted to, keep up on his bets. Likeable, but kind of a needy sort of guy. There's another guy, Paul Sinopoli. He weighed somewhere between 400 and 500 pounds, and one of his friends said that he was basically in the club because he wanted women, and how else was he going to get them? He wasn't really that active doing anything, but kind of a lonely sort of guy. Another guy, Michael Trotta. He wanted out of the club. A lot of these guys actually wanted out of the club. Yeah. I think he just needed a title. He needed to be part of something, and he wasn't that active doing anything. He'd barely gotten into the club when he got killed, and he wanted out. So this wasn't someone who you'd really fear. And the ones I've described, that's the Toronto chapter.
Right.
You want the Winnipeg ones as well?
Well, yeah, and just one thing too as well. When you talk about Stein too, because it's not necessarily written in stone that this happened, but Jamie Flans, like you say, is Jewish, which is kind of unusual. They liked him because he had money, and they could borrow money from him. You said so.
Yeah, and he also had a nice townhouse that people could use for parties.
Exactly.
So
and the thing is,
he looked like a biker.
There you go.
Yeah.
He's
a nice guy.
And the thing is that what you mentioned about Stein too is part of this a little bit. You figure is that not only is he a neo-Nazi or a Nazi supporter and has some interest in that, but he's also an anti-Semite too. So you say it's a little bit in the mix as well.
Yeah, and he basically disliked anyone who wasn't him. There was one Christmas party where he threatened to shoot a disc jockey for playing black music. And it was odd because the wives wanted to dance and they loved the stuff that was being played. And then he told the guy, play more Leonard Skinner or you can have a bullet in you. And it kind of wrecked the night. Like the wives couldn't dance to the sort of southern rock that he wanted. But, that was him. He crashed a gay pride parade. Like he actually crashed it, waving Nazi flags. And, who knows what's cooking in his mind that he feels the need to do that.
Yeah,
he's like a very angry guy. He'd sing the German national anthem, sort of burst out when he's stoned and sing it. On the other hand, he could be kind of charming. Like when he was dried out, he'd go to bake sales and buy a whole bunch of pies from old women in the area, and they'd all think he was great for a little while.
Oh, wow. Well, there is a balance, isn't there? Bought some pies. There you go. That counters everything. What I was going to say, too, is that we've got to make sure that the audience really understands, though, too, that this guy was rejected by biker gangs. Like these people want to belong to an organization, and not all of them are possessing of a certain charm. But we're talking about Stein being 58 or 59 years old at this time. So this plays into, I think, what happens, of course, and he's the major character in it too. So maybe
definitely they were expanding into Ontario and they still didn't want him. Like they sort of threw the doors open in 2000. Like when the two clubs were scrambling to get control of Ontario, they were taking all sorts of untested people, and they still wouldn't take this guy who'd been around for a quarter century. I mean, he was. It'd be like the NHL goes from 30 to 100 teams, and you still don't get a tryout.
Yeah.
It's kind of carved in stone where you are right now.
Yeah, and I think you'll be able to explain to the audience a little bit later. That plays into this whole deadly scenario later. Now weeks before the 2006 massacre here, weeks before the Bandidos National Secretary Treasurer Louis Manny Raposo, as we mentioned, was upset with the probationary chapter in Winnipeg. He said he wanted contact at least once a week, and then this we're talking about the emails. Raposo was contacting Michael Sandom, who was president of the probationary chapter, and Sandom, tell us what he said in reply to, because I think this is obviously this is very important. Tell us what he said in response to this, this request for contact. What did Sandom have?
He basically blew him off. Like he patronized him, then he blew him off, and he treated him like an idiot. I mean, the odd thing about Sandom was that he had been in the military. He actually had been a police officer, and he thought that he somehow was a bit better. The weird thing is that in this culture that makes you a lot worse. Not the military part, but the police part. And so,
right.
If they had done their due diligence, if they had checked this guy out, then he never would have gotten within 10 miles of a clubhouse. But because they had been sort of drunk and stoned when his name came up, they just took him in. He was a very delusional guy who pretended he had black belts in martial arts, that some of them that didn't even exist. I mean, he invented this martial art and made himself the Grand Master. So he was a bit like George Costanza on Seinfeld. Just this guy totally into his own fantasy about himself. But he talked down to Raposo, and Raposo was a real biker. I mean, Raposo had done serious time in Quebec. Raposo had been part of the biker wars. Raposo wasn't someone you kidded around with. He wasn't the biggest one physically, but he was the guy who actually would put a bullet in you and feel good about it. And so Raposo knew he was being talked down to, and I think he got a whiff that this guy was an idiot on the other end of it, and that bothered him.
Well, you say he said, listen, he says, I'm not available, and he said, stop calling the brothers homes and families. Like that sounds like, don't even bother me, don't bug me. So.
Yeah, and this was just sort of on the scheme of things. You got someone who's a national officer, the other one who's not really even a full member. I mean, Winnipeg, sort of in their world didn't even exist. They were just, maybe they'd get in, maybe they wouldn't, and yet this guy is talking down to a national executive member who had done serious jail time, and you just don't do that.
Now, 2 days before this killing, Stein and Cameron Acorn, a Bandido, have a talk, and Cameron is incarcerated. And so, what's the conversation about? Tell us what that conversation sounded like, and what was it about?
It was almost like something out of Shakespeare, and some of that, I've got a website, Bandido, with 2 Ds, massacre.com, where you can hear some of the conversations because I got them from court records. But
right.
Acorn caught on that something was happening. Stein told him. Stein basically spelled it out. There are going to be 2 sides, and you want to be on the right side. Acorn, and it's almost like out of Shakespeare, he could see what was happening, and he let his brothers from Toronto walk into the trap. I mean, he could have, that Boxer had been very, very good to him. He could have warned Boxer. Instead, he played stupid and let Boxer walk right into it. So Acorn seemed shocked, but he didn't do anything to pull the other people out of the fire. And I think for Acorn's future, I mean, that's something that I know a lot of people aren't really impressed by. You know, your job is supposed to be to stick up for your president and your brothers, and he let them march right into a trap. And he had phone contact with Boxer hours before the murders, and I think I counted 17 love you bros in there in the conversation, and yet he never once said, watch out, don't go, be careful.
Yeah, incredible.
It seems like there's a bit of a joke that some of these guys, if they say love you bro more than 3 times, run for your life because you're getting set up.
Well, you know, I do often cover some books that are dealing with mobsters, and geez, you know, these guys really are organized crime bikers, but we don't think of them in the same way. But in this way, they're very much the same in terms of the mobsters always say that the best friend comes and gets you. And as
don't worry about your enemies, it's your friends that'll do you. Yeah,
so that's what is illustrated in this story too. There's a caution to those best friends for sure.
Well, even the Hells Angels, I mean, they bump off a lot of their own in Quebec.
Sure.
For all the killing in the biker wars, a lot of it was intergang. You know, it wasn't one group against the other group.
Yeah, it's incredible. I remember the Quebec murders that really got everybody's attention in Canada. You know, they were about, there was numbers like this as well, weren't they? 8 or 9 or somewhere around.
Yeah, they got up to 5. You know, their big one was 5, but they hit a lot, sort of, you know, kind of in around that range or a little less. I think it in a way makes sense because with these guys, I know me dealing with them, the biggest thing is don't betray them. Like if you don't want to do something, if you don't believe something, if you're not comfortable with something, say it flat out. Don't be sneaky about it. I'm talking to one guy now for a new book, and his worst insult is to call someone a conniver. If you're upfront with them and you say, I don't do this, I don't do that, don't tell me if you don't want me to know, and you know, then everything's fine. But if you fake friendship, fake brotherhood, and then turn on them, that's what sets them off. And so I think, you know, when you look at it in that context, then betrayal is the thing that'll get you killed. You know, betraying someone, being on the other side won't necessarily get you in trouble because it's clear-cut who you are and they can avoid you. Well, I actually know one guy from the Hells Angels who knows where the undercover cop lives who put him in prison, and I asked him, you know, how, you know, what is this? I thought you guys hated the police, and he said no, the guy did a good job. He said who the guy would hate would be or who he'd really look down his nose at would be the member of his club who set him up with the cop. That would be the real rat. Sure.
Oh yeah, sure. I think there is some mutual respect where police are not getting families involved, and I think that would be. I think that would be very important because we've seen that. We've seen police take it to a very personal level, bring the family involved, and And of course, nobody wants that, right?
And there are a lot of things too where they wouldn't want to say it publicly, but they agree with the police. I mean, traffic safety. I mean, they want good traffic cops out there. They don't want idiots, weaving around on the highway and endangering them. They don't want, drunks on street corners. They don't want people breaking into houses. A lot of it, they're just like you and me. It's just on, some things, they're world things where it all differs.
Right. Now, explain and introduce the Winnipeg probationary chapter for our audience, please. And for the audience, as well as longtime listeners will know, I reside in Winnipeg right now, and I have for 18 years now. So Winnipeg is one wild place, and so I'm not so surprised because this is the murder capital of Canada, many years running. So introduce this probationary chapter, and because I found it very interesting after reading coverage of this a few years ago, that getting more and more detail about these characters here in Winnipeg.
It's funny because I was actually born in St. Boniface, like the suburb of Winnipeg.
Oh, wow.
So that made this part pretty interesting to me, and it really is Wild West. Like it's just when you use the phrase organized crime, generally the problem is justifying the organized side. Like there's tons of crime, but it's just how organized. One person with the Winnipeg chapter was Marcelo Aravina. He kind of an odd guy because he was a very, very good mixed martial artist, but he didn't train very hard, and so he gave a lot of people really good fights, but he didn't win that many. And you just think if there's any job where you're going to practice a bit harder at it, would be MMA. Like why do you want to take a beating? And if you're good enough to get in the ring with someone like that Butterbean guy, he's a really tough 400-pounder. If you're good enough to get in the ring with him and you fought some former world champions, why not train hard so that you don't absorb a whole bunch of punches? And I think there was something in that guy's psyche where he just had sort of loser stamped on his soul somewhere. There's another guy, Brett Gardner. He's kind of intriguing because he was very young. He very nice family, really nice parents, nothing criminal about them. Seems like a smart kid, read a fair bit. Sort of odd because in his trial he struck me as a very bright guy, but he tried to use the stupidity defense.
Right.
And
that's the one.
Which is kind of a smart guy trying to act dumb and not pulling it off. He kind of makes your head spin a bit. He didn't shoot anybody the night of the massacre, but he was the guy who sat in the farmhouse and listened to police scanners. And so he's an interesting moral one. He didn't touch a gun that night, but he says he didn't know. But 8 people were killed in a barn right behind the farmhouse. How did he not know? He saw the guns coming out.
Sure.
How didn't he know? And couldn't he have helped? Like he's the one who I've heard some debates on this one, but he's the one who could have made one phone call and saved everybody's life. So
right.
That's really what he went to prison for. There's one guy, MH, I can't say his real name. He had been connected to the Hells Angels, very heavy-duty guy. He turned informer very quickly. He's a survivor. He's got a new name now. He actually tricked his wife into going into a witness program with him. Very, very, the guy who knows which way the wind's blowing, which club to be in, made a fair bit of money selling cocaine. And he's another one who struck me as very, very bright, but then he had a learning disability and he could play stupid when it was to his advantage.
Right.
Hard guy to figure out, but a very tough guy. Guy Frank Mather, he's a kind of I think one of the saddest of the bunch because he wasn't a biker at all. He was just he was like a sort of a lonely stray animal who just wander in where it was warm and then be nice to whoever opened the door for him. He had done prison time with Cala Stein, and Cala Stein had said, if you ever need a place to stay, come by. His girlfriend was pregnant, and so he went by Cala Stein's house, and then he just didn't. He was the type of guy who had enough of prison culture. He wasn't going to rat on anybody, and so when it happened, he just went along with it. Stood by with a gun, but I've never heard of him actually ever doing anything violent. But then on the other hand, he was part of the group that guarded the prisoners before they were executed one by one. Another guy who I think I got real mixed feelings about, Dwight Mushy. His nickname was Big D. He was someone who you really would take seriously, who could have been not that there's such a thing as a great gangster, but he could have been very, very good at being an organized criminal if he was around the right people. Smart guy.
Why is that?
Guy.
Why is that?
Disciplined too. Very disciplined. He worked out. He had his black belt around 240, around 6'3", very focused. Would do things. And I think he thought that somehow he was getting away from the chaos of the Winnipeg streets and getting into something organized where he could actually make some money. He owned a nightclub. He was way, way too smart for this group, and I think by the time he caught on that they, with some of these guys, they act crazy and you think it's just an act, and then about 3 murders in that night, he would have realized, no, these guys are crazy, but it's too late to get out. He's already caught up in it, and so he's someone who could kill. There's one of the killings that he did it himself just because the other guy panicked, didn't put the guy away. He was suffering more, and it's kind of pathetic, but he just put a bullet in him to end it. So tough guy, and I think he felt incredibly betrayed and let down and by the idiots he was surrounded with. The person he probably despises the most is Michael Sandom, the former cop. They used to call him Little Beaker behind his back, the Sesame Street gawky bird, which kind of shows the lack of respect for them. He quit pretty much anything. He quit being a husband, a father. He was a theology student. He was a soldier. He was a cop. He tried to get in with the outlaws. He pretended to be in a whole bunch of martial arts and always just kept moving on to the next thing. And he was, more than one person said that if anyone ever played him in a movie, it would be Jason Alexander, the guy who played George Costanza in Seinfeld. Like even after he got what was supposed to be a big spot in a big club, he still looked like an idiot. And he cried in court. Like first day of court, he was just crying his eyes out like a schoolgirl.
Wow.
And not what you'd expect at all.
Yeah, no, not at all. Now, to complicate this story, this intriguing story, you have the York Regional Police Surveillance Team had been trailing a couple of characters, Jamie Flans. Because tell us about what happened on December 8th, where a man walking his dog found a body, and what happened as a product of this. What initiative was undertaken by the York Regional Police Surveillance Team? Hello, Peter? Hello, Peter? Peter? Well, we're having some technical difficulty. Peter just dropped out of the conversation when I was in a question, and we've lost the signal, but I'm sure he's going to re-engage, and then I will have him back on. I just asked him about the York Regional Police Surveillance Team that had been, they had found a man was walking his dogs, found a body on December 8th. A small black man was found bound, gagged, and badly burned in a forest area in Durham region, in Durham County. So the corpse was all that was left of this drug dealer named Sean Dowse. Dowse was last seen alive as he exited a cab late night on Saturday, December 2nd, and he was to attend a party at Flans's townhouse in Keswick, which is outside of Toronto. Now, again, we spoke about Flans. His father was a senior partner at a prestigious Montreal law firm, and his nickname was Goldberg. He ran a small computer consulting business, on-site tech support for business, and he was Jewish. And like Peter had said, that it seemed odd that there was no real financial or economic motivation for him to be in this gang. So it was to lead an exciting life, certainly. We still don't have Peter Edwards back on the line. I'm hoping we can still have him. We're about halfway through. We haven't spoken about, again, the surveillance team. We haven't spoken about the actual murder. Here we have Peter back on.
Hi, sorry,
welcome back, Peter.
There, but the line just cut out.
It can happen. It can happen. Anyway, what I was asking you was about the York Regional Police Surveillance Initiative as a result of a man walking some dogs. I talked to the audience about this on December 8th. He found a small black man bound, gagged, and badly burned. A corpse was all that was left of a man named Sean Dowse, a reported drug dealer. Now, he was last seen alive as he exited a cab late night on Saturday, December 2nd, to attend a party at Jamie Flanz's townhouse in Keswick. So take us from there. What happened as a result of this? And this surveillance went on for 4 months. But tell us just what happened and what they thought was their target and how this plays into the story.
It was one of those things where it's almost like out of a movie where police had been following the suspected killers of Dowse. They had pretty good surveillance, and it wasn't that tricky really to get these guys on the radar because the guy had shown up at a party at Jamie Flanz's house in a taxi and then just never was seen again. And so they knew, that he had been at this party and that it was a biker place, and the killing was pretty off the charts. And so there was DNA all over the place, even though they tried to clean up. The Flanz was he wasn't a racist, and a lot of these guys were. Dowse was black, and he was believed to be involved with another biker who was white, one of his family members. And so the guy basically couldn't take someone that he knew sleeping with a black man. It was pretty much that simple. And so they killed him for it. They lured him in and killed him, and then and beat him to death in this townhouse. And the police naturally suspected the guy who owned the townhouse, and so they were following him around. And that's how they actually picked up a lot of these guys on tape in the hours leading in and leading out of the massacre. And on my website, I've actually got some of that tape that you can listen to.
Now, how much did they know from this surveillance? What did they know before this meeting? Did they know about the meeting itself? Did they know what the meeting meant? How much did the Ontario Provincial Police surveillance team? How much did they learn from this in those months? And then just before this, what did they know?
See, that's a big mystery, and that's where there's a lot of debate, and I don't think it's totally clear. I mean, they knew there was going to be a meeting. They knew the guy who was holding the meeting bragged that he was a killer. They knew that there was tension in the club. They knew that, they picked it up on tape that the main killer, Wayne Stein, was talking about how there are going to be big changes and that you can be on one side or you can be on the other side, that there's going to be huge fallout in their world. And they knew all of this, and yet they saw the cars go into the farmhouse of the guy who was the main killer and did nothing. You can argue that any night is a potentially dangerous night for these guys, but on the other hand, the tensions that night were pretty high. There was one cop who individually was trying to watch the thing and really couldn't do all that much. The way the farm was laid out, he just couldn't get an eye on it really.
Now,
so, what did they know? What should they have known? In hindsight, obviously they blew it, but any night with Cala is a night that could be murder.
But the thing is, how much information did they gain from the surveillance in terms of? Again, you say that there's going to be big changes. If they had that conversation, if they knew of that conversation, and they knew of Cala Stein's murderous sort of bent. This meeting with Winnipeg members and Toronto chapter in an isolated place, was there not precedent? Was there? Was it a failure in terms of them not thinking that? Why couldn't they put the barn under surveillance? Why did they not have enough time to do that? Why didn't they do more? And what's your take on if this was a failure on their part, based on precedent, based on the information that they had?
I think. you don't want to point the finger at any one person, but overall definitely was a failure. And one thing where there was huge failure on was that Stein had 2 lifetime weapons bans, and yet he had literally dozens of guns in his place, including automatic weapons. And so how do you get to the point where you're doing target practice in your backyard with automatic weapons, and yet you've got lifetimes of weapons bans? I mean, how does that come about? I don't know. You get all these comments about you need probable cause to search and everything. I think if someone said 1 or 2 lifetime weapons bans, that should be probable cause on its own. I don't see why you have to give them a free pass again. And it would have, any fool could have found weapons at his place.
Right. Yeah, amazing. Now, there was one person that was sick, or at least they claimed to be sick, and they didn't want to attend the meeting. Who did they speak to, and who convinced them to attend the meeting, and in what way did they convince them to attend this meeting?
There was one guy, Sinopoli, and he just really wasn't that much of a biker. He's kind of a very, very heavy guy, kind of an insecure guy. One of his friends said that he just needed to be around people. He weighed 400 to 500 pounds, and he wanted out of the club just to get his weight under control. I mean, he had trouble walking, a massive guy, but I was just sort of waiting for a heart attack. And so, and he wasn't a big drug dealer. He was just sort of, a guy who was kind of in the environment but not really doing all that much. He was feeling very sick. He wanted out, and he talked to Jamie Flans, tried to get out, talked to Boxer. Boxer wasn't so crazy about it, but he was going to let him out. But the rest of them, and Frank Salerno, who wasn't
right.
Kind of all over the map. Sometimes he'd be talking like the ultimate biker. Other times he wouldn't really fit in at all. He got very upset and wanted him there. He wanted a show of force. On the other hand, he was someone who privately had said he was going to quit the club as soon as he became a father, and he had just become a father at the time of the massacre. One of the really poignant things listening to the tapes is at one point you can hear his little son Mario, the baby, crying in the background while he's talking. And so he left the baby and went off and got killed.
Yeah, it's just dripping with irony too. What he says is the Salerno, like you say, he said, as soon as I'm a father, I'm out of here. And meanwhile, he's there, like you say, incredible. And then he says, listen, if you don't show up at the meeting, you're going to get kicked out of the club.
Yeah, it's funny because when you hit it right on the nose there when you said irony, because you talk to their friends, you listen to tapes. Most of these guys wanted out of the club, but what they didn't want was to be kicked out of the club. And so privately, a lot of these guys wanted to leave, and I talked to some former members who, they weren't looked down upon. These guys envied them for getting out, but they didn't want to be told to get out. Like, they didn't want to be ordered out, and so when they were ordered out, they fought to stay in, even though privately they wanted to quit.
Now, before we get into the actual slaughter itself, unless I got this wrong again, but what I've read in your book was basically these guys, at least as far as Texas was, at least as far as any kind of official order, there was no order to kill, but there was an order to, or at least there was the intention of taking these guys' patches and any kind of memorabilia associated with the Bandidos motorcycle gang. There was no specific order to kill all these people. So what you do say, again, this is just, again, you talk about pathetic, is that these people could have just given up their patches and that would have been it, right?
Yeah, and some of the patches were counterfeit. I mean, some of them weren't even real patches. And a lot of these guys were fighting over fake patches in a club that in a sense didn't exist. I mean, Texas didn't want any of them anymore. And so they're fighting for a bigger piece of nothing. It was, when you said pathetic, that was right on the nose. Yeah,
it's sad, very sad. Now, walk our audience through the day in question, Stein's behavior throughout. This is chilling. Before we get to the trial, but tell us about the event that day, how it was done, who was in the rafters, who was. Again, we spoke about who was the lookout in the car, or at least the police scanner. Give us the whole scenario, what happened, how the victims reacted. Again, very chilling and harrowing, unbelievable, actually. So tell us about this whole event. Go take our audience into this incredible, one of the worst mass murders in Canadian history, and one incredible evening, what they call church. Tell us about that, please.
Cala Stein, first they had to gather up the guns, which he had dozens of them, but few of them actually worked, and most of them were pretty cheap, and so they had to scrape the rust off them. They had to clean the guns so that they'd actually, come together. There's sort of things that if you knew about guns, you wouldn't want to fire them because they might blow up on you. They went around and got shells and had to clean up the shells as well because they had rust on them. So they're all getting loaded up. Some of them are putting on gloves. They get the Toronto chapter to come down. It's supposed to be a church meeting, which is a chapter meeting. They're going to have it in the barn, Cala Stein's barn, which has a Nazi flag hanging in it. When they come in, there's someone hidden in the rafters. That's Michael Sandom. He was a former military member, former cop, and he had said he was a sniper. He was up there in the rafters. He had 2 guns with him. When he was up there, and this is a guy who gets very, very nervous, he shook. So you've got an old dusty barn. This guy shakes. Dust would have come down. Wood would have come down. Would have made a noise. Raposo, who's a very, very alert guy, very streetwise, product of the biker wars in Quebec, he had a sawed-off shotgun that was kind of like a pistol. It was almost like a pirate sort of gun.
Right.
He reacted quickly and fired up at the noise, and he caught on quickly that there was a sniper up there. Sandom had a bulletproof vest on, and so he was hit, but it didn't kill him. And then he was able to shoot Raposo and kill him. At that point, you've got kind of equal numbers of people on one side and the other side, but everybody's stunned. Cala Stein had said, if we kill one, we kill them all.
Right.
Most of them thought that was just sort of tough talk. All of a sudden, that became what he wanted. Boxer, who was the one of the visitors, he was very, very respected. He was the one who both sides thought the most of. I'm sure that Cala Stein would have been happy to have him on his side. He was someone you really don't want to get mad at you. What he did, though, that I thought was extremely brave, was he stuck up for the Jewish guy. He stuck up for Flans. Cala Stein had said that he wanted to kill Flans last. He wanted him to suffer most because he was Jewish. Boxer said, no, he's solid, don't do it, you've got it wrong. He's not a rat, he's a good guy. Cala Stein couldn't stand someone standing up to him like that, couldn't stand someone who he thought was his sidekick actually contradicting him. He also couldn't stand the idea of a Jewish guy who was basically a winner, that Boxer took his side rather than Cala Stein's side. So that basically cooked Boxer. He said, do me first, I want to go out like a man. And his phone rang. It was kind of amazing because his cell phone went off. He was allowed to answer it. It was his wife on the phone. They had just had a baby. And his wife wanted to know if everything was all right, wanted to talk. He didn't want to rat on anybody, even though he was in the midst of being marched out to be killed. All he had to do was say, I'm at Wayne's farm, call the cops. He could have said that quickly enough, and just by saying it, it would have stopped the execution. But he, I think, was so into the biker code of you don't bring in police, you don't go outside, that he just said, love you, see you later, and that was it. And minutes later, he was marched out and executed by the person that he considered his best friend. And so when he was dead, the rest were easy pickings. What they did was march them out one by one and make them sit in vehicles and then shoot them. There was Salerno, the new father, was was really poignant in court when they talked about his execution, because he was begging his killers to be good to his kid. He also wanted to shake the hands of his killers. He wanted some sort of a human contact. He wanted something that made it seem less ugly than it really was, and so he wanted to shake their hands, and they wouldn't shake his hand. They just shot him instead. I think a lot of them thought that there's only going to be one more killing and then it'll end, and so they picked them off one by one, marched them out, and where some people like to put all the blame on Stein, but if you think about it, he turned his back on the group 7 times to kill people, and nobody put a bullet in it. So, in a way, by not doing it, they went along with it. I mean, he totally exposed himself to everybody else with a gun that night, and none of them turned on him. And so that's why they're all doing 25 years in prison right now.
Yeah. Now, the one of the most incredible events in this whole incredible event is Stein's behavior, singing, dancing, praying, very much evidence of his psychotic nature. Tell us a little bit about what his behavior was like with some of these people.
He was, the first word's just insane. I mean, these are supposed to be his brothers, supposed to be the guys that he cares so much about in the club, and yet he was singing and dancing. He started singing the old German national anthem. He taunted people, frankly, having a good time, which, as he killed, then he started to whine sort of midway through the murders. He talked about how he had to do all the work, that he called it the wet work, that he had to do it all, and so he was kind of whining as if he was the real victim that night, that he was the hard worker. I actually talked to Stein between the night of the murders and 2 days later when he was arrested. I knew that he either would have been killed or had done the killing. I mean, there are only 100 people in Iona Station, and so when you hear there's a biker murder and it's in Stein's town, then, Hamlet really, then, how can he not be involved? And so I phoned his place, and he was laughing on the phone. I mean, this was less than a day after he had taken part in the execution of 8 of the people that he said he loved and that were his brothers, and he was happy as a kid who just won a football game, and you could hear laughter in the background. I mean, wow. I interrupted a party to phone him.
Incredible. Wow. So they put them in vehicles, and was there any idea by these guys that they would hide these bodies, or this is a public display? Hey, we've killed them. It's a gangland slaying. They're going to find these people. Tell us what course of events happened after these murders. What transpired, and how? What kind of time are we talking about before these people were discovered? And what was the idea for the bikers to do this? Was it a public display? Was a message? What were they trying to do with what they did with the bodies?
Stein's original plan was to dump them in a Hell's Angel area, and then everybody will think that dead Bandidos must have been killed by Hell's Angels. Like publicly, they're the two groups obviously don't mix, and so Kitchener, Ontario, which would be about I'll say an hour down the road, is a very, very strong Hell's Angel chapter that had been a very strong Satan's Choice chapter, and then flipped over in 2000. So Stein's plan was we dump them all there, and everybody will blame the Hell's Angels, and we get off with it. The stupidity, though, and it's it almost seems like it's out of Shakespeare, was that they one of the cars, the most expensive car, the Jewish guy's car, the Jamie Flanz's car, it didn't have gas in it. Like it had about enough gas to go about 5 or 10 miles, and that was it. And so they had this guy, a body of a 500-pound man in the back of it. When they killed the guy, they didn't have him far enough into the van to get the hatchback down. And so this huge body isn't really secure, and it's in a vehicle that has very little gas in it. And Flans had been to a gas station for a meeting, but and police had been watching, but he hadn't bothered to fill it up with gas. It was almost like his last joke in a way. And so they've got all these bodies in these vehicles, but they don't have gas in one of them. They're heading off on Canada's busiest highway at just before rush hour, and there's a chance that the body could go flying out into the road. I mean, it was beyond stupid, and so what they did was turn off onto a side road and dump them all in a farmer's field. So there was a plan, but to give these guys, especially Stein, too much credit for thinking is a mistake. I mean, it was stupidity involved was off the charts. I mean, the idea of bouncing down the road with a guy huge, I mean, twice the size of the average pro football player, lying in the back and ready to go bouncing onto the highway, beyond stupid.
Yeah. So how long did it take for police to put this together and make an arrest, and who did they arrest first?
They basically did it the next day, and they on the website there's film of the arrest of Cala at his farm. I mean, it was pretty easy pickings, really, because I mean, someone like me who doesn't, like an outsider, just as a reporter, I could figure that Calistein's got to be involved in this, and it was pretty logical to start watching his farm. I mean, this was a guy who bragged about killing. He actually had lightning bolts announcing he was a killer and Nazi stuff on his business cards. When he wrote the letter, when he write people, he'd put little lightning bolts on it to pretend that he was a killer for the SS. Yeah, I mean, it didn't take Sherlock Holmes to get watching Calistein's place and then to move in on him. Some of them had stuck around to set up what they thought was going to be the new dominant chapter. Other ones went back to Winnipeg, but it was pretty easy to piece it together. Also, what the police had was an informer. The one guy, MH, who was involved in the group that did the killing. He was canny enough to realize that this wasn't going anywhere, and so he quickly got a hold of police and went on board. And so he was wired in Winnipeg and was able to pick up a lot of them on tape. One of the tapes that really got me was that he picked up this guy Mushy, who I've got, I don't know if respect is the right word, but if I had respect for someone in the Winnipeg group, it would be him. And he picked up Mushy talking about how when Boxer was killed, it really was impressive that he, went out like a man, that he actually laughed at Calistine. Like when Calistine was getting ready to shoot him, this guy just laughed at him as if to say, you're an idiot, and even if you kill people, you're still an idiot, you're more of an idiot. So it was kind of poetic the way this guy went out, and Mushy picked up on that and was very impressed.
So how long was the investigation in terms of the recording, the covert recording done by MH? How long did this last for?
It was a few weeks, but didn't really take too much because they had the informer inside the group. They also picked up Texas, talking to them, where they were shocked. I mean, one of the ironic things is that they picked up Texas, the sort of the epicenter of all the Bandido stuff, telling these guys that they didn't want them anymore, that they're fools. So it was, the big question wasn't why it was done or who did it, or what was done or who did it, but sort of the why. How can something so big happen over something so stupid? And a lot of people, me included, thought that there must be something about the Hells Angels involved in here. They can't be that stupid. And the Bandidos, but they were that stupid. And the Hells Angels knew more about what was going on than the average person in the community. I mean, this one Hells Angel said to me when I talked to him in a courthouse was that it's a great day when you wake up and your enemies have all killed each other. And I mean, they just woke up and were stunned that these guys who they thought were their sort of low-level enemies, rivals, just self-destructed.
Yeah, incredible. Now, what was your conclusion after all this? Like you I can almost guess, but what did you see as the why had they done it? Why had they done it? What was their intention to do? And of course the result was disastrous. But why had they done it?
I think there's different reasons for a lot of them. I mean, Calistine needed to dominate people. He couldn't stand being laughed at. He had to be taken seriously, and yet the further he went in life, the more he was laughed at. And if people don't take you seriously when you're pointing a gun at them, you've really got a problem. He was just considered a fool no matter what he did, and he still is. And so I think for him there was a huge amount of frustration. I think some of the other ones, the reason they went along with it, and the odd thing is that most of the people convicted of murder actually didn't pull the trigger that night. They were convicted for being guards. Mm-hmm. So they were convicted for standing by with rifles as other people killed, and they're basically being part of the crime even though they didn't pull the trigger, which will still get you for first-degree murder. I think that some of them were flat out afraid. I think some of them thought that if they're willing to kill 8 people, they're obviously willing to kill 9 people, and so I'm not standing up to them and getting a bullet in me too. Once it started, it would have taken a huge amount of courage to to stand up and say, no, this is wrong. I mean, they would have been killed. Where they had the problem was that they were involved, for days before that, getting guns ready and that sort of thing, and so it was easy to draw the conclusion that, these weren't innocent bystanders. But it wasn't. It's one you can debate a fair bit, that if they were legitimately afraid and if they thought that they'd be killed too, should they be guilty of murder? I think the Crown made a really strong argument that the murders wouldn't have taken place if they hadn't been the guards, and so they're guilty too.
Yeah, no, it's as you know, in Canada, it is rare to have that kind of slam dunk conviction. First-degree murder is not the easiest thing to get in the Canadian courts. There's a myriad of ways of getting it down to second-degree and even more lenient like manslaughter. But obviously, I didn't think there was going to be anything like that. But the first-degree convictions were well done. And again, like based on the email evidence, the telephone wiretap, the witness, they put everything together to have that successful prosecution. So there was, you talk about the delay at the 11th hour, and but still, it's just a sad, pathetic, idiotic, ironic story. It really is, but fascinating because you get so close and into the mindset, I guess, of these people. So it's quite fascinating. So.
Yeah, it's funny because just the irony. I mean, the part that I remember the most is the 17 love you bros on the phone to boxers he drove down to be killed, and he's saying them to a guy who is letting him die and to a guy who he tried to mentor and be nice to, and he had actually told this kid in jail to don't waste your time, don't be like a lot of those other guys, get an education. Like he was trying to clean this kid up, and the kid appreciated it. He let him get marched off to his slaughter. That's one of the parts that would really stay with me. And I got to know some of the former members who, and that's how I got pulled into doing the book, was some of them started to contact me because they couldn't believe that it was that stupid, and they couldn't believe that they thought they were kind of acting crazy and a bit crazy. They didn't think that they could actually be that crazy. It's kind of when you play a role and all of a sudden the role becomes real. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, there's a certain momentum, isn't there?
Yeah, and I don't think they caught on, that Cala, Stein, this is what he does. I mean, this is who he is, and this is where he's comfortable. Like he does exist for murder, and that, the guy's voice between the killings and the arrest, the one day in the middle when I phoned it, he was full party mode. I mean, he couldn't have been happier. If the team wins the Super Bowl or the Grey Cup, the fans aren't happier than he was that night, and he had just slaughtered 8 of his brothers.
Yeah. Well, I know there's a situation here where actually, never mind the Brotherhood of Bikers, he slaughtered his own family for an inheritance, grandparents, sisters, and conspired to kill about 8 people in his entire family. And,
it's funny because when you look at murder rates, about consistent third or so are people killing people who they've loved, people killing family members, and this in a way was a huge domestic. This whole massacre was a huge family fight. Yeah. No, it's incredible. Yeah. You also you mentioned your website, but you also are, I was surprised. I mean, I know of your work, but I did not know that you had written that many true crime books. You're like the top true crime guy in Canada, hands down. Very, very interesting cases that you've covered. The Upper Wash case, but the Milgard case was my favorite. It's such an incredible case. You see so much wrongful conviction in the U.S. that it's come to be known that certainly they can have wrongful convictions, but in Canada we haven't had that many really, really high-profile cases. In the Milgard story with the movie and the books and the coverage and the compensation and it's just an incredible story for those people who aren't aware of your work. Again, maybe you can give the website for that, and how many true crime books have you under your belt, Peter? I'm working on my 11th right now. Like the 11th will come out next early next year, and it's about a long-time biker who was in the Satan's Choice and the Hells Angels who put in 4 decades. So that'll be number 11. The website's bandidomassacre.com, and Bandido has 2 Ds. They deliberately spell it differently. And if you go on there and click the first page, you can actually see the people we've been talking about riding on their bikes or talking, and see transcripts and that sort of thing. Yeah, that one kind of blew me away. The Milgard thing, I never forget David in Stony Mountain Penitentiary, and he'd lost all of his appeals. I think it was 1992 or 1993, and it looked hopeless. Like it looked like he was going to be in there forever, because he wouldn't say he was sorry because he didn't do it, and so he wouldn't fake remorse. And I needed to find out quickly if this guy's for real or not, and so I said, why don't you just say you're sorry? He was obviously sorry for the killing, but he wasn't going to say he was sorry that he did it because he didn't do it. Right. And he was so disgusted at the idea that he confessed to something that he didn't do, that he walked away from me and went back into the prison. Like we were in the visiting area, and he just looked stunned. And I needed to find out, is this guy for real or not? So I needed to ask a rude question, and I just had a huge amount of respect for him as he walked away, even though he was disgusted by my question. And then his mother ran in and brought him back out again. But he was so bothered by that murder and his name being connected to it when he didn't do it, that he would have spent his life in prison rather than give a false confession. I also remember him with Larry Fisher, the guy who actually did do the murder, and at that point his name had been kicked around a fair bit, and I asked David in prison, what do you think of Larry Fisher? And I thought he'd give some angry quote, and what he said was that he deserves a fair trial, and that David knows what it's like to be wrongly accused, and so Fisher should be fairly judged. And I thought, wow, this is I know David's had his problems, but he did some really classy, noble things that a lot of people don't know about. I also remember him asking him right after he got out, what do you like about it, being on the other side? And he said being able to look at the sun and look at everything and not have to look through bars. And he that got me. He went to visit me in Toronto at the newsroom, and we went outside afterwards onto Yonge Street, and it was raining, and it was kind of a warm rain. And David took off his shoes and his shirt because he wanted to feel the rain, and he didn't care if everybody thought he was crazy, because he had been, 22 and a half years where he couldn't feel the rain, and he wanted to experience it, and he wasn't going to waste a minute. And so he, when he went walking away, he hit his arms out, like he was an airplane or like he was making a cross, and it's because he wanted to feel all the possible rain that he could. And that's one of those images that just stays with you. Yeah, absolutely. And the thing is, when he had the compensation, and the authorities still could not leave him alone. They were bothering him a few years ago to come to some hearing and threatening that he should come. And he said, well, I'm not really up to it. And they said, well, you have to. And then to add insult to injury of the entire thing, the sort of conclusions were that the mother interfered. And if the mother wouldn't have interfered, and meanwhile, if the mother wouldn't have interfered, he still would have been in there. So his mother deserves, any honor we can think up for her. I mean, she, if it wasn't for her, that kid would be dead. Or no, he's not a kid anymore, but I mean, he'd be dead, and the real killer would have probably done more. I mean, one thing, when Joyce Milgard, it was phenomenal sticking up for her kid, but she also was sticking up for other women who were victims of Larry Fisher. I mean, when you don't convict the right guy, you're letting the real killer, the real rapist go out there and do more, and he's got impunity. I mean, you're giving him a free pass. And so, I mean, Joyce did a huge public service, and it's so sad to see people try and drag it down to a petty personal level when they should just be learning from her. I mean, it's funny because with Joyce, it's one of those things where you really feel it's a privilege to deal with someone, to talk to someone. And I remember, when I thought about my own personal problems at the time, then I'd look at Joyce and I'd think, geez, how can I whine when she's not complaining? Yeah, it's an incredible story of fighting a system that still does not want to admit that they made this grave error, and not an error that anybody can understand. It is an incredible story. So, and I urge. From that, I got the impression that a lot of kids are bullied into confessions that really aren't real. Especially a lot of First Nations kids. that a lot of people have said they've done things that they just really haven't done. I remember David Asper, who then was Milgaard's lawyer, and he talked about one guy who confessed to a murder when he was actually in custody somewhere else at the time of the murder. I mean, it was, unless the guy was a phantom, it was absolutely impossible for him to have done it, but he just figured he's going to get shafted anyway, so why not go down easy?
Well, what I have issue with in Canada is that supposedly we have these checks and these balances, but we are much more lenient to start with. Like, I don't want to go on and on about it, but we have a hard time prosecuting for murder one, whereas and in Canada we have this false assumption that, we don't have the evidence for a murder one conviction because you'd have to have all this evidence of premeditation. Well, in America, it's 1 minute of premeditation, 30 seconds of premeditation. The driver that went there for the robbery, he is also convicted of murder. And you could say that this is unjust, but I think that there are some, I think Canada can learn something from not necessarily the harshness of American law, but that there are circumstantial cases that make sense to juries, that they do not, excuse murder as we often do in Canada. You're intoxicated, so it's just it's manslaughter, and we're talking about much, much less time. So I think that's the inherent differences. But I can't believe that we have any wrongful convictions with the lawyers that you can get paid for by the taxpayer here, and in the process, the long, careful process, and I can't believe that we're still getting wrongful convictions in this country.
I'll tell you the one that really gets me, and I mean, this is someone who works in Toronto, is that if you are going to do a gangland killing, and I mean the guy I'm writing about now, he's shot people for clubs, but if you are going to do one, I think that it should be ramped up if it's done in a public place. I mean, to go and execute someone in the Eaton Centre.
Yeah.
To shoot someone on Yonge Street when people are doing Boxing Day shopping. I mean, if you're even really hardened, total bikers will call that cowardly. The idea of shooting from a distance, the paralyzing of a woman in a sandwich shop in Toronto because they didn't have the guts to walk in and face the guy they're going to shoot, and so they try and shoot around a bunch of regular folks just lining up to buy sandwiches. I think if it's in a public place, I think that should ramp it up. Like, I think that should be there should be something that contributes to, both to the sentence and to just to what it's called. I don't think you should be allowed to claim manslaughter when you shoot someone in a crowded food court, or when you shoot someone in a crowded restaurant, or when you shoot down the street. This guy I'm talking to now, it sounds funny, but I mean he's disgusted by the lack of courage by a lot of people now who are going around doing gangland killings, that they don't have the guts to get out of their car, don't have the guts to walk up to someone, plant a bomb, and hope it hits the right person. I mean, it's they're killers, but they're cowards too.
Well, we've been hearing that from the mob ever since Sammy Gravano's complained about the La Cosa Nostra not being the way it used to be. Meanwhile, he's ratting out on John Gotti. So, I don't know. You hear a lot of that. There's no more honor. But I don't know. There never really was there? Maybe
there never really was, but there was maybe there's something between honor and courage. Like it does take us to walk right up and do it, and any fool can shoot from a distance. I mean, one joke now is that some of these guys, it'd be better for the public if when they're in prison you gave them target practice every day. At least hit the guy you're trying to hit. Don't hit a bunch of mothers and daughters and little kids going to see movies. At least teach them how to put the bullet where they want to put the bullet, rather than spraying all these people who don't have a clue what the dispute's about.
Well, the thing is too, we have as I talk to an American audience sometimes, or primarily our American audience, I say, we have about 1/10 of the murder rates that, say, a typical American city would have. Not that you can compare exactly, but a fraction, say 10%, we'll say, for a comparable place. Winnipeg, say Detroit, comparison. But the thing is, if you really think about it, what we are under the assumption in Canada, and it may be true to a certain extent, but for other reasons, is that we're a kinder, gentler country. We're not as violent. And you hear this from Canadians. They're violent Americans. That it's like their entire culture is based on violence, which is is incorrect. And yet, if you look at the Vincent Lee, if you look at the case of Colonel Williams, you look at the case that I was involved with, Sidney Tierhuse, you look at Mark Twitchell from Edmonton, and now you look at Luca Magnotta, we're very, very competitive, aren't we?
Well, and then our biker wars too. I mean, there were around 200 people murdered, and others disappeared, a lot more injured, just in Quebec, and mostly not even Quebec, but really in Montreal. And there are only 120 or so Hells Angels in all of Quebec. I mean, at one point, the biker violence accounted for 17% of the province's murders, and so it's sort of like when we do it, we go right off the deep end. The polite Canadians just turn psychotic when they turn the switch. Yeah, no, I think we're very, very competitive, and like I say, I think Canadians should dispense with this sort of notion and realize that certain people deserve to be in prison for the rest of their lives because they are dangerous individuals, and we need not try to rehabilitate everyone because there's certain characters that absolutely cannot be rehabilitated. There isn't even a device for consecutive convictions for murder. There is no actual life sentence without the possibility of parole. I don't know. I can't see how any political party's tough on crime when they just don't get that. I've seen some of Wayne Kelstein's parole records, and one officer said the problem is the guy likes being a criminal. Like that's what he wants to be. And so, how do you rehabilitate someone when that's his self-image? That's who he wants to be. That's what he thinks is right. Where do you go from there? Well, you can never rehabilitate the victims' families because if they have a parole hearing, regardless of whether you and I knowing that, well, it's unlikely that, Robert Pickton will not be paroled, but yet there's still a parole hearing. So I think, and every time there's a victim, there's a whole bunch of waves of secondary victims, other people who are hurt, who've lost trust, who've been nervous, will never be the same, and so it's it's not like it stops with one person. It keeps on going. No, it's kind of numbing, really. when you think about it, and when one thing I think, it sounds like me on the soapbox, but if people are upset with a organized crime drug war, then stop buying the drugs. And I know it's not quite that simple, but everyone who bought drugs from someone connected to the Hells Angels in Quebec was contributing, was basically buying bullets for the biker war. These guys don't operate in a vacuum, and they don't force the drugs on people. One of them said, we don't ram it up their noses. They buy it from us. And so I know that doesn't make the guy innocent, but sometimes we try and make all the crime on the other side of the fence, look what they're doing and look how bad they are. But you don't have a drug war without people buying drugs. Well, you also don't have a drug war when, again, it's idealistic, but I think it's irresponsible that we didn't learn anything from the first prohibition of alcohol and Al Capone. Imagine what alcohol would be like and society would be like if Al Capone was still selling booze, right? Yeah, and I think if money went into treatment, like if it bugs me when I hear about people with drug problems and they've got a huge waiting time for treatment, or in Toronto where there are 36 kids who basically work in these high-risk communities, and they're 2/3 of them are being laid off. That the money would be better spent helping people, find better things to do. There's some people like Palestine, you're just not going to. You can spend all the money you want, surveillance on them. You're still not going to stop them. Yeah, and I think the thing is that, and I'll just leave it at this statement in terms of my position, is that I really think that the sooner we try to regulate all drugs, what will happen is that we need to separate regular society, whether it's a cocaine user for the first time or a cocaine user that's been using it for years. The reason why some of this biker activity is normalized, why women will go out with bikers, why they see an attractive, well-dressed biker with an expensive bike, they see the allure, they see, there's charming people, there's charming guys that are outlaws, So I think the sooner that we separate regular society from being in contact with any kind of organized crime via drugs,
then there will always be an element that will be in organized crime, that will be gangsters, that will be people who are violent. But when you take the drug profits out of the equation, and then you take the contact and the glamour and the normalization out of it, you're going to have the pirates of the world, the outlaws that went into a small innocent town and robbed the bank and killed whoever was got in their way. You're going to still have those people, but you're not going to have that collateral damage like you had in the biker wars, and you have with all of this. All of these bikers, all of these prospects, all of these people had families. Like you say, the president of the probationary chapter, or the Toronto chapter, talking on the phone with his wife. All these people have families, they have children, they have, so again, so that's my bit too. You're right. Somebody supported organized crime by buying those drugs, but we also have people have to be realistic about how all of this works, and I think it's time that the drug war is a failure, a dramatic failure. And like you say, if people are addicted to drugs, maybe they should be given the opportunity to get off those drugs and to get some kind of treatment.
If they've got the guts to finally step out and face it, then we should all be cheering them on and helping them. We shouldn't be saying, wait another 5 months and maybe you can get in. And also, it sounds like me in the soapbox, but a lot of these guys, when you talk to them one-on-one, they're very, very needy, and they really want to belong to something that seems like something, and they...
Sure.
And so, better sports, better community programs, better something, so that when they're 16, 17, 18, they can belong to something that gets them respect, that doesn't involve carrying a gun and doesn't involve blowing things up. A lot of them, when you get them one-on-one, you think, geez, this guy would have been a good football player, this guy would have been a good hockey player, this guy's got some writing ability, this guy sounds odd, but would have been good in the military, would have been good in business. A lot of them, and they can see it themselves. And but they want to be in something, and they've got kids who don't know who their fathers are, or whose fathers couldn't give a damn about them. One thing that jumps out at me too when I deal with these guys one-on-one is it's a very short list of the amount of them who had a good father at home. A lot of them don't know who their fathers were, or their father would slap them around. There's not a long list of people in organized crime outside of the mob, which is a different thing. But a lot of these guys got into it because they needed some sort of male figure who could guide them a bit, and it turned out to be a guy who was making money illegally.
Yeah, but all that is still there's all kinds of people that got hard luck stories, and so these people still chose to belong to an organization that's known that they will kill, and that's the bottom line. It's like anybody that joins La Cosa Nostra. You can't be that naive. You got to know what's possibly in store here. So, as much as it's just a sad story that wasted lives, wasted opportunities. No sense to this murder at all. But a great book and a great story. And again, like you say, just so many incredible things. It's almost like Sopranos when you see the surveillance team, and yet they can't prevent this from happening.
Well, it's bizarre for me because for the website, I could pick through all sorts of video and all sorts of audio, before the murder, and you think, geez, if I've got this stuff, didn't the light go off that maybe something bad was going to happen? Couldn't they patch it together that maybe something terrible was just about to go down? Yeah,
absolutely. Well, Peter, I want to thank you very much for your time. It's been a very, very informative interview. And for those people listening, we've been talking about the Bandido Massacre by Peter Edwards. And go to his website. Give that to us one more time.
Bandidomassacre.com, and Bandido with 2 Ds.
Yeah, Bandido. Okay, well, thank you very much, Peter. We'll post that up on Facebook, and I'll send you a link as well, and if you'd like to share this interview with people. So thank you very much, and we'll be looking forward to your 11th true crime book, so get a hold of me definitely when that's going to be coming out. We'll be looking forward to that. And thank you again for this interview.
Well, thanks for having me. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you very much. I did too, and have yourself a great evening, Peter. Thank you.
Talk to you. Bye.
Good night.